Welcome to the Hollywood Video Podcast. My name is David Wells. I'm your host, and we're going to talk about movies. So, Netflix. Chris Nolan is afraid of it. Martin Scorsese has a begrudging alliance with it. Well, I wouldn't really say that Chris Nolan is afraid of it. He just really loves the theatrical experience. And the guy running Netflix has said some things that are opposite to that point. But anyway, it's here to stay. I don't think it's going anywhere. Streaming isn't going to stop anytime soon. But it's reached some interesting results. Just a quick history lesson on Netflix. So Netflix used to be a thing. So Netflix started in the 90s. I know that seems shocking. And they had the idea that you could go online and order your movies to be shipped to your house, DVDs, and then when you were done, you could mail them back. And nobody thought much of it, and I think they even tried to sell themselves to Blockbuster, and Blockbuster refused them. And so, like, okay, fine. And so they just perfected their model of business, and then they began to dominate. And then they eventually did streaming once broadband internet got strong enough. And at first they would just license movies and show them, but then they started to do original content. And things got interesting. And they've kept getting interesting all up until this day, the present. And one of the things that they've come up with recently is a movie that you may not be able to escape. Maybe you haven't seen it, but you know of it. It's the movie Kpop Demon Hunters. I kind of remember my first thought when I heard the title or I found out about this movie was, okay, they're trying to jump on the wave of K-pop popularity and K-dramas, and probably at least one of them probably just thought of it as like similar to anime or whatever. Like, it seems like one of those executive things where it's like, yeah, kids are really into this K-pop and anime stuff. Like, boss, anime's from Japan. It's in Asia and the kids love it. Yeah, anyway, it seems kind of like a by committee sort of idea at the behest of executives, but that's not the case. In fact, it's far from it. So, yeah, I remember I got interested as soon as I heard reports that the fake bands from the movie Huntrix and Saja Boys were topping the music charts and streaming platforms and were actually outperforming real K-pop groups like BTS and Blackpink and Twice. So that got me intrigued. And I listened to some of the music on YouTube, songs from the movies. I'm like, this sounds pretty good. It sounds like a real K-pop group. Now, I don't have, well, at the time, I didn't have a Netflix account, so I do anticipate, okay, when am I going to hang out with somebody who does have Netflix? Spoiler alert, I've wound up restarting Netflix, or my Netflix account. So their marketing worked. Anyway, so it's July 27th, the day before my birthday. I have an impromptu birthday party with my mom and siblings, and we were about to watch Happy Gilmore 2, but then I remembered I really wanted to watch K-pop Demon Hunters. I'd heard about it, listened to the songs, seen the visuals. I was impressed by it. Looked good. It kind of does that thing where I think it's called animating on twos. It's that kind of, it sounds almost derogatory to say choppy animation style, but it's that style made famous by Into the Spider-Verse and been continued on in other projects like Puss in Boots 2: The Last Wish. I really liked that. There's going to be a podcast on Puss in Boots 2: The Last Wish. I'm honestly surprised I haven't done it yet, but it is coming. So we watched it, and it might be my favorite movie of 2025. There are others, but I like this one. So, funny thing about it before I get into the movie, I'm going to talk about like my experience with Korea K-pop. I actually did. A lot of people will get into Korean stuff because of K-pop. For me, it was the opposite. I don't think that there might have really been a gap of 2 years before I started listening to K-pop. So with me, it was reverse. Before I studied Korean, I'd studied Japanese and Chinese before, and that was fun. And then I was curious about another Asian language that I could study. And so I found out about Korean. So I gave it a shot. Now, the way I used to learn a language or study language was I would play a CD in the background. It was usually audio CDs that I would listen to that would teach me how to speak. Now, with Japanese and Chinese, I could set those CDs on in the background and do something else. But I remember when I first started to study Korean, it sounded so different from any of the other languages I had studied up until that point. I actually had to try super hard, and I had to put my ear to the speaker and repeat it several times to just get a grasp on it at first, at least like how to replicate the sounds myself. So I realized this isn't something I can do just in the background. I had to really try hard at it. And I think it wasn't until like 2 years later that I started to listen to K-pop. I think that I had maybe typed in Korean pop on the computer at the library, and this band called Cherry Filter came up, and then another band called Loveholic. And because these were my first sort of two exposures to Korean pop music, I thought that, oh, I guess this is what Korean pop music is like, but they were the outliers rather than the general rule. Go check those bands out. Anyway, so about 2008, 2009 is when I started to visit Korean churches. And I found out that there's a very strong presence of Christianity in Korea. A lot of Koreans are Christians. I'm not trying to push anything at this moment, but I'm just stating the facts. And so I figured, oh, this could be a way that I get exposure and practice. A lot of good that's done. I've been practicing for a while now, and I'm still not that great, but that is totally on me. I'm solely responsible for my own linguistic progress. So I remember what's interesting is I didn't get my first concentrated and sustained exposure to K-pop on YouTube or the internet, although that would have made way more sense. I actually got it from DVDs I bought at a local Korean market. So I'm sure At the time, I didn't know this, but I think they were doing something illegal. The shop was, but they've since stopped doing it because, everybody streams now. So what I think they would do is some Korean markets, they would they'd record programs and burn them onto DVDs and sell them for like $1 a piece. I remember I walk into the store and like, hey, do y'all sell any movies or music? And they did, and I asked like, and so I had them pop in a DVD, and I was like, I couldn't find the group I was looking for, but some of the music was catchy. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'll buy a couple DVDs. And I bought like two, and I was surprised that they were just $1. And what's funny is I think there was even like a copyright thing on the DVD, which is funny. But anyway, that's how I first learned about a lot of groups and who they were. I learned about the groups Kara and Shiny, amongst others, and 21 and 4 Minute. Oh, Girls' Generation is another one, and 2 p.m. and 2 a.m. I could go on, but yeah, I think for a couple months I bought DVDs a couple times, and it was always this show called Inkigayo, and I didn't do it as much as you would think, and I think by the time they stopped selling DVDs at the Korean markets, they started to stream these programs on like Hulu and stuff and YouTube. Yeah, and then I really started to watch K-pop on YouTube in like late 2009, early 2010. And I couldn't see it at the time, but I couldn't see this becoming like a global thing. To me, it was just something that was particular to me. I was like, oh yeah, I like Korean pop music, and nobody else seemed to know about it. It was, which is why it seemed so bizarre just a couple years later when K-pop became mainstream, when everybody was talking about it. It was what a lot of people listened to. It was the strangest thing to see something that up until very recently had been just one of my own idiosyncratic interests that were just something that was of interest to me. And it was surreal. So anyway, fast forward to the present. I watched the movie and I like it. And something else that's interesting, one of my brothers who has never had any interest in K-pop whatsoever, about a day or so afterwards, he's listening to K-pop on Spotify. It's funny that I've tried over the years to try to expose him to that stuff, but this movie was the Trojan horse that finally broke in. So, what's the movie about? The movie is about it's as it sounds. There's this K-pop group called Huntrix, and they fight demons. They kind of set up the mythology that all throughout the years, demons have attacked people, and they're hunters who use their voices in songs to fill people's souls and fight off the evil. And there's this thing called the Honmun that keeps the demons at bay. And if it turns golden, then the demons will be gone permanently. So there was, let's see, I want to make sure that I'm getting everything accurate. Just 1 second. Where did I put my phone? Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Just have to look up something quick. Let's see. Okie dokie. So, stupid. I really should have done a bit of my research. Okay. Um, so the previous K-pop demon hunters were this girl group called Sunshine Sisters, and one of them had a daughter named Rumi, who is part demon. That comes in later in the story. And so her mother died, and Rumi was raised by another member called Celine. Celine is trained all three of the K-pop demon hunters, Rumi, Mira, and Zoe. Rumi's the leader. Mira is kind of the tough girl who can't be scared by anybody, and Zoe is the cute, bubbly one. So, an important story point is they don't go into too much detail about Rumi and her parentage. They say that her mom died, her father was a demon, and they don't spend too much time dwelling on that. Like, how did it happen? There's never the whole star-crossed lovers thing of like, oh, like, yeah, they just don't go into detail. It's just happened and the story progresses. But it's something of great shame that Rumi has to live with. And part of her motivation is that when the honeymoon is golden, then the demons will be permanently banned, and she has markings on her that signify her demon heritage, and all of that will be wiped from her. So she has a reason to make this happen. And it's no coincidence that their new song that they're trying to release is called Golden. Oh, also, they have a manager who named Bobby, who is voiced by Ken Jeong. And what's kind of funny is another thing about this movie is they don't go into detail about sort of the finer mechanics of like management and agencies and that converging with the whole, oh, they're hunters, these mythological figures fighting against demons. It's like they obviously seem to belong to a label that is run by a company. Things are believable, but they don't let finer details interrupt the flow of the story, which I feel like another movie, and I was about to say an American movie, but I believe the director of this movie is Korean American. I feel like, okay, maybe I should say if this were done at Disney or Pixar, maybe they would have really made a point of going into depth on those details. But they don't, and it helps with the pace of the story. One of the great things about this movie is the pace. It's very snappy, doesn't lag, and even in the soft moments where the movie allows itself to breathe, it never feels like they put a roadblock. So anyway, the main bad guy of this movie is this evil demon force called Quima. And I think it's taken from two characters, I mean, Ghost and Monster. I don't know. I'd have to do further research, but in very limited research I did, I heard something like that. So anyway, in the opening of the movie, right after there's this big expo dump about the lore and mythology of demon hunters, the girls are on their way to a concert, but then they drive by it, or no, they fly past it because they're in a plane, and they realize that the plane staff are all demons in disguise. So they fight them, and the plane blows up, and they fly down to the show. They land, they fight and kill some of the remaining demons, and everybody thinks, oh, this is just a big part of the show. So yeah, one thing I was saying earlier is like, it really seems to only be the girls who are aware of the whole demon battle thing. They just like their management, their people involved in the industry, they just don't know. So meanwhile, in the demon world, Quima is chastising all his subordinates, all his minions for not destroying Huntrix. And then one of his minions, a very humanoid looking demon named Chinu, who has a what looks to be like a guitar, he proposes an alternative idea. He and I think four other human looking demons, they want to start a boy band to compete with Huntrix. And they figure if they can get their fans, then they can get their power, and the Hunlin won't turn golden, and they'll be able to go hunt for the souls of humans. And at first, everybody laughs until they demonstrate some of their music and dancing skills. And they're like, okay, let's give this a shot. So fast forward, and they're promoting their single Golden, and Rumi's voice acts up. She can't hit some high notes she needs to hit. And so Zoe decides to take her along with, along with Mira to this doctor who I didn't know until afterwards that I looked this up, was voiced by Daniel Day Kim from Lost. I know he's been in other things, but that's always going to be the thing that I know him from is, yeah. So anyway, they go there and they get these special tonics to heal Rumi's voice, which turns out to be just regular grape juice. But on the way, they run into Genu and his demon cohorts in human form, and they don't think anything of it until they start performing and drawing away their fans. They see flashes of like the demon marks on them. Nobody else notices, but they do. And so they get this idea to, they don't know what's going on. This isn't like anything they've ever faced before. And so they make this plan to go and attack them. And the group is called Saja Boys. So they go to this game show to attack them. But Genu is crafty. He knows they're there. And he brings them on the show to like kind of I guess it shows that he's more aware than they realize. He's crafty, and they escape, and then Not too long after, a fight at a bathhouse ensues, and Jinu discovers Rumi's markings. But he does something unexpected. He covers the markings just as the rest of Huntrix are about to find out Rumi's secret. So this builds up some sort of rapport between Jinu and Rumi. And Guima is ecstatic about the progress that Saja boys are making. They're winning souls, and the Hunrun is affected. And so Huntrix devised this plan to. There's a K-pop idol contest, which is like the biggest event of the year, and they figure if they can perform a song really well, then the Hanmun will go golden, and the demons will be banished forever. So throughout the rest of the movie, there are battles and everything, but also there's this romance that developed between Jinu and Rumi. Rumi finds out that Jinu, several hundred years ago, he was a struggling musician who sold his soul to Guima, and he got to live a luxurious life in the palace, and he doesn't reveal this to Rumi just yet, but it's implied when they first meet that him and his family lived in the palace, and that they lived in luxury until the demon mark showed up and he was exiled. But it turns out later that he abandoned his family and just lived in the palace until Guima came for him. And he's riddled with guilt from this, and he wants Guima to erase his memories. So him and Rumi come up with this plan. Or, well, more Rumi comes up with this. She tells him, hey, if the Hunrun turns golden, it'll probably take away your demon marks. And one of the things that's noticeable is Guima basically gets into people's heads, and he tells them like the worst things. And it's like this voice they hear saying like, oh, you're no good, your efforts are worthless. And one of the things that Jinu and Rumi come to realize is that when they're together, neither one can hear Guima's voice, especially Jinu, which is surprising. So the big contest happens, and the Saja boys are going to go on first, but something happens, and then Huntrix gets to go on. Now, the key point, Mira and Zoe are tricked into thinking that their manager Bobby has been kidnapped, but then they find out it's not true. Two of the boy band demon members, they disguise themselves as Zoe and Mira, and in front of the whole audience, they tear Rumi's jacket off and reveal the demon marks. And so she's exposed to everyone. I should clarify, this movie is only PG, so it is just her jacket. This is, again, a kid's movie, so given that I'm just talking about it, yeah, just disclaimer right there. Zoe and Mira find out, and their whole thing they've been taught is kill any demon no matter what. And you almost think that they're about to go after Rumi, but Rumi just runs off and they let her. So the Saja boys say, hey, we're so sorry for what happened with Huntrix, but we'd like to do a song for you. We'd like to do a concert for all of our fans. So Rumi confronts Celine, and at first Rumi, they have this fight about like, why couldn't you accept me? And Celine is just like denying reality, and Rumi's just not having it. And she says like, well, I don't want this kind of Hunrun I have to cover this up. And she disappears. So then the Saja boys, at this point, they're not even trying to hide their true nature anymore. They perform a song, the fans love it, and Grima shows up in the human world because so many souls are giving power, and it seems like everything's going to come to a terrible end. Even Zoe and Mira look like they're going to be bought in. But then Rumi shows up and starts singing sort of the big climax song of the movie. And Zoe and Mira join in, and Grima sends his forces at him. But then they reach the center of the stage, they hug, and it changes the atmosphere of the room. So then Grima's minions go after them, and like 4 of the 5 Saja boys, Genu stays in the background. They go to engage them, and then Grima gathers all his power, and he sends a blast at Rumi. He's like, "Your voices can't stop me." And Rumi's like struggling to hold it back. Zoe and Mira are fighting the Saja boys. Cuts to Genu. He looks conflicted. And then the next thing you see, Genu is taking the full brunt of Grima's blast. And Rumi's like, "I want to save you." And he's like, "You already did." And he becomes human. He gives her his soul, and that gives her the power to go after Grima. And then everybody, like, it's a real, like, sort of Dragon Ball spirit ball moment where everybody gives Huntrix their, like, spirit and voice and everything, and that empowers them to deliver the crushing blow to Grima. And then a brief prologue where they continue being pop stars and work on their next hit, and everything is fine. So this is a really enjoyable movie. Due in no small part to the songs, which again have dominated the charts. It came out in like June or whatever, and everybody's still talking about it. Surprisingly, at both of my jobs, I can't find anybody who's seen it, but I know this movie is big. On my brother's job, everybody was talking about it, and yeah, it's really enjoyable. And it has an all Asian cast, which some people listening to this might think, well, why wouldn't it? The movie takes place in Korea. That is another thing. I kind of feel like this movie really had to be made today. Not to say that movies like this couldn't happen, but I feel like if this movie were made even a couple years ago, they would have had to have found some excuse to bring them to America or something ludicrous like that, even though there are Disney films that take place in places that are not America. And they are all voiced by like Korean or Korean American actors. Again, I think back in the day, that might not have been the case because it was considered animation. They would have like not worried about that. But again, this movie is very visually dynamic. One thing, no surprise, I mentioned Into the Spider-Verse and this movie a lot. And one of the commonalities they have is they're both um, from Sony Animation. They teamed up with Netflix. So one of the things they do is there's this thing called animating on twos. I think that's what it is. And it gives it that sort of choppy look that's sort of reminiscent of anime. So it uses it to great effect. It doesn't quite do the thing where Spider-Verse did, where Spider-Verse animated and looked like it was hand drawn. Um, K-pop Demon Hunters only kind of animates as though it was hand drawn. I think it is very interesting that it took until 2018 with Into the Spider-Verse, and then about a year or two ago with Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and now 2025 with K-pop Demon Hunters. It took this long, or it's the point is being driven home that not everything has to be realistic looking. Things need to be believable, but I think the veil has been pierced that things have to function like they do in the real world, especially in animation. Another movie that looks interesting is there's a new Cat in the Hat movie coming out soon, which they try to make it look very hand drawn. I don't think it does the choppy animation like Spider-Verse or K-pop Demon Hunters, but they really do try to make it look as though it's hand painted. So that's going to be interesting. Um, what else can I say about this movie? It's just thoroughly enjoyable. Story's great. It moves effortlessly. Supposedly there's a 3-hour cut of the movie, though by that I mean there's a 3-hour cut which delves into all the details that they kind of skip over that I mentioned about earlier. Um, just given how expensive animation is, I would not be surprised if the deleted scenes are just animatics or storyboards. So I remember it was one of those things where I wanted to watch this movie right afterwards. And I wanted to watch it like again. And I think I waited like a day or two before I finally restarted my Netflix account just so I could watch it again. It's funny. It gets compared and contrasted a lot to Pixar's latest offering, Emilio, which, in all fairness, I haven't seen, but hasn't been getting a lot of love. This is kind of the second time that Sony and Pixar have gone sort of head to head. I think the last time was when Into the Spider-Verse came out in 20, was it 23 or 24? Anyway, it was around that time, and when when the Spider-Verse sequel came out, it was going sort of head to head with Elemental, which Elemental did so much better than Emilio. Elemental didn't get the attention that Spider-Verse did or even previous Pixar movies, but it did surprisingly well. I think it wound up box office numbers doing better than Spider-Verse. It just happened that nobody was paying attention. It's wild to think that Sony animation is seems to be dominating recently, and that somebody like Pixar, who until recently was believed infallible, could ever falter as bad as they did. Um, I think they just lost sight of what made them golden for like the longest time. But I don't want to rip on them too much, just because I want to keep it positive and talk about how much I do love this movie. Um, I would not be surprised that when Gen Alpha, who they're going to be the kids who are watching this movie as kids, when they grow up and start having kids. I bet you when Gen Alpha finally becomes parents, the names Ginu and Rumi are going to enter the option pool of names. I mean, Zoe's already an American name, but yeah, I would not be surprised if start if Gen Alpha starts naming their kids Rumi and Ginu, even if they're like white or black, like I don't know. That'll be interesting. But anyway, it's a good movie, and people are already begging for a sequel or even a series. And it's one of those things where, like, I'm a bit torn because I like the movie so much, and I would love to see the movie does leave you wanting more. And even the creator has said, like, yeah, I've got so many ideas. Like, there's so much underneath the hood of this story. And while I would probably wind up watching it, part of me is kind of just like, just leave it alone. Don't spoil things. Please let us just have this kind of awesomeness. Because there are movies that try to tread ground again and they fall flat. And I don't want it to be one of these. I will say, just to harp on the whole Sony versus Disney and Pixar thing, it is wild to think that, Sony in the animation world, they used to be negligible. Nobody took them seriously. I think their first movie was Open Season, and that was just basically them aping what other studios had done. The two characters on that movie had very much kind of a Shrek and Donkey dynamic. And their other movies that came out, they had more misses than they did hits. They came out with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Surf's Up, which were both really enjoyable movies. And they did a Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs too, which was also enjoyable. But everything else was largely forgettable. And if it was, and it wasn't always just animated. Sometimes it could be animated in live action, and they really hit a stride with Spider-Verse and continued that with K-pop Demon Hunters. And I hope they continue with a thing that it seems that Disney and Pixar have seemed to have forgotten is just try really hard to entertain people. You don't have to pander. You don't have to think, oh, what's the thing that people want to see? In the words of Kevin Smith, tell the story that you're desperate to see, that you wish somebody else would make, but for whatever reason they're not, so you've got to make it. And this definitely feels like one of those movies, and can't recommend it enough. So go ahead and watch it. It's great. Yeah. So this has been an episode of the Hollywood Video Podcast. Watch a movie, or if you're so bold, go ahead and make a movie. And I hope all your dreams come true, and bye.